The great hall of the orbital station was silent except for the low hum of the air filters and the occasional soft shuffle of boots against the polished floor. Hundreds of eyes, human and alien alike, were fixed on the long crescent-shaped table where the youngest human delegate sat. Ethan had come here with nothing more than the duty to represent his people and perhaps share a few polite words. But the moment his gaze met the alien girl across the table, something inside him shifted. She was unlike the towering warriors or cold-faced officials who had spoken before her. Her features were gentle, her voice when she spoke to the assembly carried a quiet strength, and yet there was a subtle tension in her posture, as though she was used to being watched, judged, and underestimated. She had been explaining the dangers her people faced near the edge of their territory, the raids from unknown enemies, and the lack of protection from the council. Most in the room listened, without interest, their attention already drifting. Ethan, however, leaned forward, every word striking him like an unspoken plea. Without thinking, he rose to his feet and stepped away from the human delegation's bench. His voice cut across the room, not loud but firm enough to make even the older alien dignitaries turn toward him. "I will protect you," he said. "Not just your mission here. I will protect you with my life." The words left him before he could weigh them, but they hung in the air like a living thing, drawing every gaze, every breath to a standstill. The alien girl's name was Leora, and the moment she heard him speak those words, something changed. Her pale silver skin deepened into a glowing crimson shade that spread rapidly from her cheeks to the tips of her fingers. Her large, luminous eyes widened, and she drew in a sharp breath, but no sound followed. Her lips moved once, twice, as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Around the hall, a ripple passed through the alien envoys. Some stiffened in their seats. Others turned to each other with urgent whispers in their own languages. Two of the elders seated near Leora's side exchanged looks so sharp they could cut steel. On the human side, Ethan caught a few startled glances from his fellow delegates, but they looked away quickly, as if pretending they had not heard him. He could not understand why such a simple promise had created this reaction. Leora's hands trembled against the smooth surface of the table. Her crimson glow deepened further, almost pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The air around her seemed heavier, the space between them charged with an unspoken meaning he could not decipher. He took a step forward, instinctively wanting to ask if she was all right, but a tall alien official seated 2 seats away from her raised a hand in a silent command for him to stop. "The session is over," the official said suddenly, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. There was no vote, no discussion, only the heavy sound of chairs shifting and boots moving as the assembly began to rise. Leora remained in her seat for a moment longer, her gaze fixed on the polished floor. Then, without looking at him, she stood and allowed 2 attendants to guide her away. Her expression was unreadable, but her flushed skin glowed like a warning light in his mind. Ethan stayed frozen in place, unsure if he had just made a mistake or done something he would soon regret. All he knew was that whatever had just happened had turned every pair of eyes in that room into a silent jury, and the verdict, whatever it was, had not yet been spoken. Ethan walked out of the great hall with the slow, uncertain steps of a man leaving a place where the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The tall glass walls of the station's central corridor reflected the warm glow of nearby stars, but he barely noticed them. His mind was tangled in the image of Leora's face, flushed deep crimson, her voice locked away as though an invisible hand had stolen her words. The memory played again and again, and every time he tried to make sense of it, he found himself even more lost. He had made a promise, nothing more. Why should such a vow cause her to tremble and silence the entire chamber? The corridor around him was busy with officials and aides moving quickly to their next tasks, yet something in their pace had changed. Conversations that had been open and friendly just an hour ago now happened in hushed tones. He caught pieces of alien languages that meant nothing to him, but carried a certain weight in the way they were spoken. A group of human officers from the delegation walked past him without a single nod of greeting, their eyes fixed forward. It felt as though an invisible line had been drawn around him, and anyone who crossed it might be in danger. One of his fellow human delegates, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus, appeared from a side hall and caught up with him. His face was set in a tight expression, and his voice was low enough that no one else could hear when he said Ethan needed to follow him immediately. They turned down an empty passage that curved away from the station's main walkways until the sounds of footsteps and voices faded. Marcus stopped near a sealed door, checked twice over his shoulder, and then looked Ethan straight in the eyes. "Do you have any idea what you just said in there?" Marcus asked, the question heavy rather than angry. Ethan shook his head. "I told her I'd protect her. What's wrong with that?" Marcus exhaled through his nose, as though trying to hold back a stronger reaction. "You didn't just offer protection. You gave what their people call the bond vow. No human has ever done that before. And if you had done your research, you'd know it's not something you say unless you mean to bind your life to theirs." Ethan frowned, still unable to see how a cultural phrase could mean so much. "I didn't know. I wasn't trying to." "Whatever you're saying, I did." "That doesn't matter now," Marcus said, glancing toward the far end of the hallway as if expecting someone to appear. "They heard you. She heard you. And from what I've heard, once the bond vow is spoken, it cannot be taken back. You need to be careful. Right now, you've stepped into something that could swallow you whole." Before Ethan could ask more, a sound behind them drew his attention. Two alien attendants, tall and graceful, were moving quickly in their direction. They carried an air of quiet authority, and their deep violet robes swayed with each step. When they reached Ethan, they didn't speak to Marcus. They addressed him directly, their tone polite but firm. "You will come with us," one of them said. "There are matters that must be discussed privately." Marcus started to protest, but Ethan raised a hand. "It's fine," he said though. It was anything but fine. He followed the attendants through a side corridor, lit only by pale strips of light along the floor. The path twisted in ways he could not keep track of until they stopped in front of a tall arched door. One of the attendants pressed a hand against a panel, and the door slid open silently. Inside, the room was dim and quiet, with walls that seemed to absorb sound. At the far end, sitting alone, was Leora. Her skin had lost some of its intense crimson glow but still held a warm hue that marked her as different from earlier that day. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, there was something in her eyes that seemed almost like relief. The attendants bowed slightly and stepped outside, leaving them alone. Ethan hesitated, but then moved closer until he stood a few steps away from her. "Leora, I don't understand what happened back there," he began. "Why did my words?" She lifted her hand in a small gesture for silence. Her voice was softer than he had expected when she finally spoke, and there was a careful weight in every word. "What you said in the Great Hall. For my people, those words are not casual. They carry a meaning that is older than our recorded history. You gave me a vow that binds more than just promises. It is life to life, soul to soul. Once spoken, it cannot be withdrawn." Ethan felt a strange chill run along his spine. "But I didn't know. I didn't mean to." She shook her head slowly. "Intent is not part of the vow. The moment you said it, it became real. And now there will be consequences. For you, for me, for my family." Her voice wavered slightly, though she kept her gaze steady. "I cannot speak of everything here. There are ears in the walls. But tonight, if you truly wish to understand, come to Dock 7, alone." Before he could reply, the door opened again, and the attendant stepped back inside. Leora lowered her eyes and said nothing more. They guided him out without a backward glance, and as the door slid shut behind him, Ethan felt the cold truth settle in his chest. He had stepped into something far larger than himself, and there was no turning back. That night, as the station lights dimmed to mimic the cycle of a distant sun, Ethan lay awake in his assigned quarters. Every sound outside his door seemed sharper, every shadow deeper. He replayed the day in his mind, her crimson glow, the silence in the hall, Marcus's warning, and Leora's quiet voice telling him to come alone. He didn't know if Doc 7 would hold answers or only more questions, but he knew he would go, somewhere beyond the steel walls of the station. The stars kept burning, silent and unblinking, as if they had seen vows like his before and knew the cost they carried. The corridors of the station were quieter at night, though they never truly slept. Somewhere in the distance, the deep hum of the main engines could be felt more than heard, a slow heartbeat that reminded everyone they whirled. Ethan moved carefully through the half-lit passageways, his footsteps soft against the metal floor as he followed the winding route toward Dock 7. The air felt cooler here, and the light strips along the walls were dimmer, giving the sense that this part of the station was meant for few eyes and even fewer footsteps. Had waited until the rest of the human delegation was asleep, or at least locked away in their quarters, before making his move. He had taken no communicator, no visible weapon, only the small pocket blade he carried out of habit. Every turn in the corridor seemed to draw him further from the familiar center of the station into an area where the architecture changed. Walls were darker, the corners more rounded, and the faint scent of something metallic lingered in the air, like rain on iron. Dock 7 was at the farthest end of a side wing that overlooked the black curve of space. When he reached the outer door, it stood partially open, and pale light spilled into the hallway. He stepped inside and found himself in a small loading bay. Beyond the transparent shield of the dock's barrier, the stars were brighter here than anywhere else he had seen on the station, scattered across the void like shards of silver. Leora stood near the edge of the dock, her back to him, her figure outlined against the galaxy beyond. The crimson hue of her skin had softened into a faint glow, and her long hair shifted slightly with the subtle movements of her breathing. She did not turn when he entered, but she spoke as though she had known the moment he arrived. "You came," she said quietly, her voice carrying both relief and a hint of sadness. Ethan walked toward her, stopping only a few steps away. "You told me to, and I need to understand what this vow means. No one will tell me anything except that I've made a mistake." She turned then, and her eyes in the dim light seemed even larger than before, filled with something between fear and wonder. "It is not a mistake, though many will tell you it is dangerous. My people believe the bond vow is a thread that ties two lives together so strongly that even death cannot break it. Once given, the bond becomes part of who we are. We feel the other's pain, we share the other's strength, and if one falls, the other falls too. This is why I could not speak in the hall. It was not shame or anger. It was because I knew what it would cost you." Her words settled over him slowly, and he thought of Marcus's warning and the strange tension in the gray hall. But why? Would anyone care if two people are bonded? He asked. "Surely it's a personal choice." She shook her head. "Not for us. Bonds are rare now, and the Council guards them fiercely. In the past, they were used to unite great families, to form alliances that could not be broken. But when the bond is between two of different worlds, it is seen as a threat. They fear what they cannot control, and they will test you. They will make you prove your worth before they allow the bond to remain." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And if I fail this test?" Leora stepped closer, the glow of her skin casting a faint red light over his hands. "If you fail, you will die. And because we are bound, I will follow you in that death." For a long moment he could only look at her, trying to measure the truth in her eyes. There was no doubt there, only the calm certainty of someone who had lived under such laws all life. "Then why ask me here?" he said finally. "If this bond is so dangerous, why not break it before it begins?" Her expression softened. "Because once spoken, it cannot be undone, and because I needed to see if you would stand by the words you gave so easily in that hall. You could still walk away now. The council would call it dishonor, but you would live." Ethan thought of the way she had stood in that vast chamber, speaking about the dangers her people faced while others looked away. He thought of the way her voice had carried even when no one wanted to hear. "I said I would protect you," he said at last, "and I meant it. Whatever this test is, I'll face it." Her gaze searched his for a moment before she gave a small nod, though her lips trembled just slightly. "Then you must be ready. They will come for you soon. And when they do, you must not show fear, no matter what they place before you." The sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the dock. Liara's head snapped toward the noise, and her glow deepened again, this time not from embarrassment, but from alarm. Out of the shadows emerged two tall figures in the same deep violet robes as the attendants from earlier, their movements slow and deliberate. "They have found us," she whispered. The robed figures stopped a short distance away, their eyes fixed on Ethan. "The council summons you," one of them said. "The trial of the bond begins at first light." Ethan glanced at Liara, who gave the smallest shake of her head, a silent warning that whatever lay ahead was far worse than he could imagine. But there was no turning back now. The journey to the council chamber felt longer than it should have, though Ethan knew they were only crossing a few sectors of the station. The robed attendants walked ahead with a steady, unhurried pace, their silent presence leaving no room for questions. Behind him, Liara walked without speaking, her steps light but certain, and he could feel the faint pull of her presence even without turning to look. The corridors they passed through grew taller and darker, the walls etched with flowing lines of alien script that seemed to shimmer faintly under the dim lights. Somewhere deep inside he felt the weight of what was coming settle over him like a heavy cloak, a sense that once he stepped into that chamber, his life would no longer belong entirely to him. When the doors finally opened, the sight before him was unlike anything he had imagined. The council chamber was vast and circular, with tiered platforms rising high along the walls, each one holding alien figures from different worlds. Some were tall and spindly with silver eyes, others broad and scaled like creatures from ancient myths, and all of them watched in complete silence as he stepped into the center. The floor beneath him was a smooth black stone that reflected his movements as though he were standing on still water. In the highest seat directly opposite the entrance sat the High Speaker, an elder of Liara's people whose skin carried a deep maroon shade and whose eyes glimmered like polished stone. High Speaker's voice was calm, but carried the weight of authority when he spoke. "Ethan of Earth, you have spoken the bond vow to Liara of the House of Vera. In our law, the vow is life joined to life, strength shared, fate shared. This is not a small matter, and it is not for outsiders to take lightly. No human has ever spoken it. Therefore, before this bond can be recognized, you must face the trial." Ethan stood still, his voice steady as he asked, "And if I refuse?" The speaker did not look away. "Then the bond will be broken before it is complete, and both you and Liara will bear the mark of dishonor. Your life will be spared, but hers will not, for she will be seen as one who failed to protect her bondmate." The meaning in those words struck hard. This was no choice at all. If he stepped back, Liara would pay the price. If he stepped forward, he might not survive. He glanced toward her where she stood at the edge of the chamber. Her eyes met his, and though she said nothing, he could read the silent plea in her gaze, a plea not to risk himself for her, even if it meant her own life. That made his decision even easier. "I accept the trial," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. The council stirred, a faint murmur running through the tears as the speaker raised a hand for quiet. "So be it. At first light you will enter the proving ground. The trial will test not only your body, but your mind and the strength of your bond. If you falter, you will not leave it alive. And neither will she." A section of the floor opened, with a deep mechanical sound, revealing a set of stairs that led downward into darkness. Two guards in dark armor moved to either side of Ethan and gestured for him to follow. He descended into the lower levels of the station, where the air grew cooler and carried the faint scent of metal and earth. The passage ended in a wide chamber, lit by pale blue light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Here, the guards left him in the care of an older alien whose robes bore symbols different from the attendants above. This elder regarded him with an unreadable expression. "The trial is not made for your kind," he said in a voice that was more observation than warning. "You will face the elements of the bond. Fire will test your courage, water will test your endurance, shadow will test your mind, and the bond will test your heart. Few of our own survive all four. None of your people have even tried." Ethan listened without flinching. "Then I will be the first." The elder studied him a moment longer, perhaps searching for fear and finding none. "Rest while you can. When the lights shift to gold, it will begin." They left him in a small stone-walled chamber with a low bed and a single vessel of water. He sat down but could not bring himself to lie back. Instead, he closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift to Leora. He could almost feel her presence, faint but warm, as if she stood just beyond the walls. He thought of the look in her eyes when he accepted the trial and realized she had expected him to choose the safer path. But that had never been an option for him. He had spoken the vow because he meant it, even if he had not understood its weight at the time. Now he did, and he would see it through to the end. Time passed without measure until the pale blue light shifted slowly into a deep gold, and the sound of distant chimes echoed through the chamber. The elder returned, his robes moving in slow arcs as he stepped aside to reveal a set of high doors. Beyond them lay a faint glow and the sound of something vast and alive. Ethan stepped forward, his body tense but his resolve steady, knowing that whatever waited for him in that place would decide not only his fate, but hers as well. The great doors opened with a slow, grinding sound as if they had not been moved in centuries, and a rush of air unlike the cool, controlled atmosphere of the station rushed against Ethan's face. It carried heat and the faint smell of stone and ash, and as he stepped through, he found himself in a place that seemed to stretch beyond the limits of the station's walls. The proving ground was not a single chamber, but a series of vast connected spaces, each one shaped to test something deeper than skill. High above, the light came from no visible source, golden and shifting like the glow of a distant sun. Somewhere in that strange air he could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the presence of the council watching from afar. The first space was a wide expanse of dark rock, broken by rivers of fire that flowed like molten veins through the ground. The published space was a wide expanse of dark rock, broken by rivers of fire that flowed like molten veins of the council watching from afar. The first space was a wide expanse of dark rock, broken by rivers of fire, that flowed like molten veins through the ground. Heat was intense, every breath tasting of smoke and metal. As he stepped forward, the floor trembled beneath him, and sudden bursts of flame leapt from hidden vents. He realized this was not about avoiding the fire, but moving through it with certainty, for hesitation here meant being consumed. He fixed his mind on Leora, on the image of her standing in the great hall, on the bond that now tied them, and forced himself forward. The heat seared his skin, His lungs ached, but he kept going until he reached the far archway, his body drenched in sweat and his heart steady with the knowledge that courage had carried him through. The second space was the opposite, a vast pool of still water that reflected the golden light above like a perfect mirror. There was no bridge or visible path, only the knowledge that he must cross. The moment his feet entered the water, the cold was so sharp it felt like 1,000 blades. Every movement was slow, every breath a battle. He pushed forward, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his limbs, and more than once the thought of turning back whispered at the edge of his mind. But then a strange warmth touched him, faint but real, and he realized it was coming from somewhere deep inside, from the bond itself. It was as if Liara's own strength was flowing into him. With that warmth guiding him, he reached the other side and pulled himself onto solid ground. Shivering but alive, the third space was unlike the others, for it was not a place of heat or cold, but of shadow. The walls and floor were swallowed in darkness so complete he could not see his own hands. The silence here was heavier than stone, and as he moved, shapes began to form at the edges of his vision, memories twisted into threats, voices from his past telling him he would fail. Faces of people he had lost. It was not a physical battle but one of the mind, and he understood that the trial here was to hold on to who he truly was. He closed his eyes and shut out the illusions, focusing on the single thread of connection that bound him to Liara. In the dark, he could almost hear her voice, not in words but in a feeling that told him she believed he could find the way. He followed that feeling until the darkness thinned and gave way to light. The fourth and final space was a wide circular hall with a single figure at its center. Liara stood there, her skin glowing faintly, her eyes fixed on him. At first he thought it was truly her, but as he stepped closer, she spoke in a voice that was too calm, too perfect, and he realized this was part of the trial. The figure before him was a creation of the bond, a final test of the heart. It told him that if he turned away now, if he abandoned the bond, he could leave alive and free. No one would judge him, no one would punish him, and she would live, but they would never be connected again. The choice was his alone, and the illusion made it sound so reasonable. He stood in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of the choice press on him. Freedom or a life forever tied to hers, with all the danger and sacrifice it would bring. Yet as he looked into the illusion's eyes, he knew the truth. He had already chosen the moment he spoke in the great hall. "I will protect you," he said, the same words he had spoken before, but now with the full weight of understanding behind them. The figure's eyes softened, and the entire hall seemed to shatter like glass, the fragments dissolving into light. When the light faded, he was back in the real council chamber, standing on the smooth black stone floor. Liara was there, truly. There this time, her skin glowing a deep and steady crimson. The High Speaker rose and declared that the trial had been passed, the bond recognized. But it was only when Ethan turned to Liara that he saw the full truth in her eyes. The bond was not just a cultural tradition or symbolic tie. It was alive. He could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own, could sense the way her breath caught when she looked at him. And he knew that if one of them ever fell, the other would follow. This was the shocking reason behind her reaction in the great hall, the truth she had feared to tell him, that his offer had tied their lives so completely that they were no longer two separate paths, but one shared fate. As they left the chamber, the murmurs of the council and the watching envoys followed them like a tide. For the first time in living memory, a human and one of Liara's kind were bound by the vow, and the station's history had changed in a single day. At the top of the grand steps outside the chamber, Liara turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "You didn't just save my life, you became part of it." Ethan looked at her, the warmth of the bond like a steady fire in his chest. "Good," he said simply. That's what I promised. And together, they walked forward, the bond between them unbroken, carrying both the weight and the strength of a promise that would last until the stars themselves grew cold. The end.